Hello and welcome to Runkle of the Bailey. My name is Ian Runkle. I'm a Canadian criminal defense and firearms lawyer. So we now have the mandate letter for the Minister of Public Safety, and a lot of people have asked me to go over this, especially with regards to the firearm-related stuff. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to have a look at this letter and talk about what's good, what's bad, what's really bad. And this is the letter. It starts off with a big preamble, and I'm going to skip over this for the most part. A lot of this doesn't seem to be terribly specific to the Minister of Public Safety, so although I haven't looked at the other mandate letters, I suspect that this is mostly cut and paste. Like when they say that the minister is directed to create clean jobs, well, public safety isn't going to be sort of behind the opening of any factories or anything like that. So it's unclear as to how this is kind of specific to the public safety portfolio. But they do eventually get to the point with, to realize these objectives, I ask that you achieve results for Canadians by delivering the following commitments. And it starts off with firearm stuff. And I'm going to skip over that for now. I will come back to it, but if I start off with the gun stuff, I won't get to any of the other stuff. So let's look at the next entry. With the support of the Minister for Women and Gender Equality and Youth, accelerate action to reform the RCMP, including by 1. Enhancing the Management Advisory Board to create an oversight role over the RCMP. Now, the Management Advisory Board doesn't deal at all with sort of public complaints from what I can tell, and so this isn't really going to address at least my primary concerns with what's going on with the RCMP. Externalizing the Independent Center for Harassment Resolution. This sounds like they want to try to make the Independent Center for Harassment Resolution actually independent. I mean, this is kind of like, what was it before? Anyway, establishing defined timelines to respond to recommendations from the Civilian Review and Complaints Commission. I don't know that this is going to mean anything, because usually when they say there's defined timelines, I don't expect that we're going to actually see any teeth to this. It's a good idea, I mean, but how do you actually put teeth to this so that they have to respond? You know, what are the penalties if they don't? Can they just ignore that? You know, and can the responses just be, okay, yeah, we'll get you a response within 3 months, and the response is NO period send. So it'll really depend on how this is implemented. I don't have high hopes, but it's a good idea, I guess. Launching an external review of the RCMP's sanctions and disciplinary regime to determine the adequacy of existing sanctions and whether they are applied properly and consistently. Well, it's a good idea that they're doing this externally, because we've seen far too much of police reviewing police. But quite frankly, I think we're past the point of needing a review. A review sort of sounds like, oh, well, we don't know if there's a problem. We just want to do some investigation and find out. But we do know that there's a problem. It has become something of a national, embarrassment that the police reviewing police system is not providing with proper, consistent, and adequate sanctions. In fact, what we see is often behavior that would be punished criminally if a civilian did it is addressed within the police sort of review process, and ends up with like, oh, well, you're going to face a 10-day, we're going to dock you 10 days pay or something. Whereas, somebody else might be going to jail. So this, I feel, is just kind of kicking the can down the road. We're not going to do anything about it. We're going to review whether we're going to do something about it. Don't talk about it. Do something. Don't review it. We know it's a problem. Do something. Prohibiting the use of neck restraints in any circumstance, and the use of tear gas or rubber bullets for crowd control, alongside developing national standards for the use of force. It's a neat idea. I don't think that they're actually going to end up implementing this. I suspect that crowd control might be a specific choice here, as opposed to, say, riots. So we'll see. I mean, I suspect that this is just careful use of language, but I guess we'll see. I mean, I don't think they're going to be getting rid of their tear gas launchers anytime soon. Conducting an external review of de-escalation training to make sure it results in the safest possible outcomes for officers and Canadians. And I think de-escalation training is really important. I would like to see more of that. I've been concerned by what I see as sort of American-style training moving north into Canada. And when I say American-style training, what I mean is this philosophy that police officers are always under deadly threat, which is not super realistic. Policing is actually a fairly safe occupation. It doesn't make the top 10 most dangerous occupations. But people get told, oh, you're, constantly under threat, and presented with these kind of wild scenarios designed to make sure that police are sort of eager to respond with force. And it's had bad effects in the States, and I'm concerned when I see it sort of making its way north of the border. So we'll see. Introduce legislation to create a review body for the Canada Border Services Agency, including defined timelines for responding to complaints and recommendations. Now, I have some issues with the Canadian Border Services Agency. So does just about everybody who is at all connected with the airsoft community, because right now airsoft is getting held up, but I don't think this is going to help with any of those issues. So I'm not sure what this is intended to address. Stuff about management of the border with the United States for health and safety. So this is COVID rules about border issues. Engage with provinces, territories, and municipalities to better connect the RCMP with community social support workers. It's not a bad idea. I mean, a lot of the problems that the RCMP is asked to deal with are often social problems. If you've got somebody with mental illness who is behaving in a way that is causing distress to people around them, often the better solution is not the police, but instead, somebody who can get them housing and treatment and so forth. So it's a good idea. I don't know if the RCMP should really be the kind of the touch point on that one, but I guess it's a step. Conduct an assessment of contract policing in consultation with provinces, territories, municipalities, Indigenous partners, and stakeholders. This is probably related in particular to Alberta making noises about wanting a provincial police force. We also see this one that I thought was interesting. Accelerate work to establish a dedicated unit to investigate all forms of major financial crime and consider options to strengthen laws and investigative powers relating to financial crimes. Concurrently, we'll work to bring forward a proposal for the establishment of the Canada Financial Crimes Agency, whose sole purpose will be to investigate these highly complex crimes. Now, it seems to me that maybe this isn't the best method. I don't know about creating a new agency. I mean, we've already got the RCMP, who are theoretically, this is one of the things they do, is deal with this kind of national interest, crime. So hiving it off into its own thing kind of seems like a bit of a shot at the RCMP, for one, but also, if we start splitting up the expertise, we're not going to end up with the most effective response. I like the idea of dealing with major financial crime, international money laundering, for example, but we'll have to see what this turns into. And I'm concerned about this whole, how many agencies do we need? This one I thought was going to be a little bit interesting because they also say contribute to broader efforts to promote economic security and combat foreign interference by introducing legislation to safeguard Canada's critical infrastructure, including our 5G networks, to preserve the integrity and security of our telecommunication systems. So does that mean you're not going to be approving Huawei? Oh, right. I don't think that's actually what they're doing here. Expanding collaboration and information and intelligence sharing with Canadian partners and all orders of government to address security risks in foreign research and investment partnerships. That sounds like they're going to be getting more of your data, and I am a bit of a privacy guy. I don't like them having my data, so that concerns me. Increasing resources available to the RCMP national security agencies for this purpose. All right. Fair enough. More money for people dealing with that. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit here. Continue to support the Minister of Intergovernmental Affairs, Infrastructure and Communities to support an integrated government response to protect Canada's democratic institutions, including the federal electoral process, against foreign interference and disinformation, including cyber threats, and then support the Minister of National Defence to ensure that Canada is in a position to respond to rapidly evolving risks and threats in cyberspace. That's interesting. But they also go on to talk about work with the Minister of National Defense, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, and the Minister of Innovation, Science, and Industry, and in collaboration with implicated ministers, to develop and implement a renewed national cybersecurity strategy, which will articulate Canada's long-term strategy to protect our national security and economy, deter cyber threat actors. That's interesting language. It makes them sound like they're science fiction. I mean, you can just say criminals, right? They're just criminals. And promote norms-based international behavior in cyberspace. That language worries me. Norms-based international behavior in cyberspace. I mean, what does that mean? Do you mean that you don't want people engaging in, criminal acts, harmful acts, distribution of things like, bad pictures? That's as far as I'll get, just because YouTube will otherwise threaten me. But, or do they mean things like they want us to be nice to each other and they want us to, so I worry about how much that this might step into control of thoughts and speech versus control of actual harmful behavior. This is something to watch, especially because we've seen a whole bunch of proposals about, trying to control how people communicate. So this is worrying. They also talk about work with the Minister of Justice and Attorney General of Canada to bring forward measures to counter the rise of ideologically inspired violent extremism. So again, they're going to want to manage how people discuss things and strengthen the capacity of Canadian police and prosecutors to bring to justice cyber criminals and terror suspects to the fullest extent of the law. Again, you can just say criminals. I mean, you don't become some special category of criminal just because you use a computer. They're just criminals, right? And, when they say strengthen the capacity of police and prosecutors, I'm concerned that this is going to be things in terms of undermining privacy protections, trying to more spying, more surveillance, that sort of thing. We'll see, but that is concerning in that respect. So I guess I'll skip up at this point. I mean, there's some other stuff here in terms of, promoting infrastructure. We want digital and right touch technology. But a lot of this is kind of uninteresting. So I guess I'll go back. Oh, I will address this point here. Engage with the provinces and territories to enact Clare's Law so that individuals at risk of domestic violence can request information from the police, including from the RCMP, about their partner's violent history. We'll really have to see what the implementation of this looks like, but as a general principle, a law named after a dead person is almost certainly a bad law. There are very, very few exceptions to this. And most of the proposed implementations I've seen to this Clare's Law idea, the idea is basically if you're in a romantic relationship with somebody, you can then ask the police to turn over information about their criminal history to say, hey, is this a violent person? Do I need to be, worried about this? The problem is that this ends up being a situation where these laws might be really, really abusable. How do you prove that somebody's actually in a domestic relationship with you and not, say, just fishing for information that they can use to extort you, to blackmail you? Hard to say. So we'll have to see what that implementation looks like. I don't have a whole lot of faith because our current government sort of tends to create legislation in the way that most people write the rules for a drinking game. And so I don't have a whole lot of confidence. But let's have a look. And I mean, we've seen a lot of reactionary law. We've seen a lot of law that doesn't seem to accomplish what they mean it to do. So, yeah. I'm going to go back and have a look now at the firearm-related stuff because I think that's what a lot of people are most interested in. So, continuing implementation of C-71 regulations for firearm license verification and business record keeping. So the business record keeping stuff is basically a backdoor registry. I did a video on this before, but it's basically, they said, oh, we're not doing a long gun registry. Except what they plan to do is implement a long gun registry by making businesses keep all the records. And it's going to be quite onerous in that respect, but this is really what they're trying to do, is create a backdoor gun registry. When they say firearm license verification, the system that they have previously proposed would I mean, the idea is that you got to prove that you've got a license, but this hasn't been a huge problem. And what their license verification system that they proposed would actually do is basically require you, if you're looking to buy or sell a firearm online, to provide so much information that is really unnecessary for the person receiving it to actually check that you have a license. Um, and what it will do is effectively defeat the verification system that the Canadian Firearms Agency uses to determine that you're you when you call into them, because you've had to provide this to everyone you're buying a gun from. So this is actually I'm really concerned by this system because it really seems like it's going to facilitate identity theft in the firearm, area, such that criminal actors will be able to impersonate law-abiding gun owners in order to acquire firearms illegally. I think that that firearm license verification is not going to be a public safety improvement. On the other hand, on the contrary, it's actually going to be a massive vulnerability, at least with the way that they propose to do it. Making it mandatory for owners to sell banned assault weapons back to the government for destruction or have them rendered inoperable at the government's expense. They've been saying that they were going to do this for a while, although they keep changing the language here. Quite frankly, it makes no sense that they're not offering a grandfathering option. This is just to appease some, certain special interest groups there. But, this, I really hate the language of sell the weapons back to the government. I didn't buy mine from the government. I mean, if you're selling me guns, government, then maybe we can talk about selling them back to. But what you're talking about is, you're going to confiscate them and give us some amount of money that, that you decide. Selling also implies a much more voluntary transaction. I mean, if I'm selling it, I would normally get to set the price. I don't know of any transactions where the buyer is the one who decides what price. I would like to buy a private island, and I determine that the appropriate price for that is a shiny dollar. This does not, this is not how the world works. I can't buy a car for $1 unless it's, literally on fire at the moment that I'm buying it. So yeah, this language is complete weasel words, but, will or have them rendered inoperable at the government's expense. Their standards for inoperable are way beyond the legal standards. Yeah, all sorts of issues with this. I could probably do an entire set of videos just on this issue, but yeah, regardless, this is the government looking to seize weapons that are not typically used in crimes. Requiring the permanent alteration of long gun magazines so that they can never hold more than 5 rounds, and banning the sale or transfer of magazines capable of holding more than the legal number of bullets. They mean cartridges, but anyway, this is going to be a huge impact when they say that they're not looking to affect hunters and target shooters and so forth. This is absolutely going to affect those people. I just saw somebody on Twitter who was saying, oh, well, I just own a rifle and a shotgun, so this, I'm not bothered by this. Well, you should be. I mean, if your tube-fed pump-action shotgun, if somebody out there makes a magazine extension, oh, and they do, because of course they make magazine extensions, because in most countries this is not a big concern. Now it affects you because you're going to have to figure out how to modify this. And in many cases, it's just not going to be possible to modify it to the standard of, that they seem to be suggesting, which is a standard that it is impossible to convert it back. Well, I mean, impossible to convert it back is, if you're talking about, with the assistance of a skilled machinist, that's never going to be achievable. So yeah, they're effectively talking here about banning almost every magazine that is currently out there in the legal market. And that's, this is going to have a huge impact. There's going to be tons of people for decades to come who bought magazines legally and have no reason to believe that they are of concern in any form. And so this is going to end up seeing a lot of people who have done nothing harmful to society getting arrested down the road. And, quite frankly, the impact of this on, say, indigenous hunters is going to be huge. On, hunters generally is going to be huge. This is really bad policy. It's really badly thought up, and I don't know why they're doing this. This isn't really a big concern. Providing financial support to provinces and territories that implement a ban on handguns across their jurisdiction. So bribes. They're going to bribe local governments. And what we're going to end up with is this patchwork of laws, which is completely how Canadian criminal law normally doesn't work. Normally, Canadian criminal law doesn't work in this fashion of, what's legal criminally in Vancouver is legal criminally in Montreal and Toronto and, none of it and all. So this is really looking to undermine one of the sort of positive things about Canadian federalism. And again, why? Legal gun owners aren't the source of the problem. One of the things that this will affect is police in a big way, because police often own handguns and practice with their handguns because they want to be, they want to be proficient with them for in the event that they've got to actually use one in the moment. Police do not get enough of a budget for training with firearms, and so lots of police take this up as a sort of personal thing, right? If you are ever in need of defending yourself with a firearm, in the course of policing, you want to make sure that those rounds are going into the target and not, into a bystander or something like that. So this is really going to impact police officers as well as target shooters and so forth. We have Olympic target shooters who use handguns. We have Olympic, or we have not, Olympic, we have like top level 3-gun competitors and so forth. Are they going to have to move to avoid these laws? It's ridiculous. And now finally, we get to something that might actually do something about crime. Implementing the Gang Prevention and Intervention Program to provide direct funding to municipalities and Indigenous communities. Great. It would be, this is what we need to be doing more of, is trying to disrupt this organized crime activity. Most firearm, what they say is firearm violence, is actually organized criminal activity violence, people dealing drugs, people, engaged in this kind of behavior. And working with the Minister of Justice and Attorney General to introduce red flag laws to allow the immediate removal of firearms if that person is a threat to themselves or others, particularly to their spouse or partner, and increasing maximum penalties for firearm trafficking and smuggling. Well, you're getting rid of the minimum penalties for those things, so that's kind of interesting. Now, this promise is basically a lie, because we already have these kinds of red flag laws. Police, if they think that you are a threat to yourself or to others, including your spouse or partner, but not limited to, that could be anybody, they have the ability to apply for a warrant to come in and seize all of your firearms. And if they think that it's impractical or difficult, it's too much of a pain in the butt to get a warrant, they can just go and actually, go in without the warrant and then justify it after the fact and say, listen, here's why we had to do this. And they can go in and seize all of those firearms. Now, the way it works right now is that they take all of your guns as well as your firearm license and so forth, but they don't immediately impose a firearm prohibition. And the main people that affects in terms of a positive, reason for doing this is members of the military and members of the police. Because, the ordinary Canadian gun owner, if you've had your gun license seized in this process, then there's no circumstance where you use a firearm. However, police don't immediately get fired from their job if they've had their, firearms seized in this fashion, because they're not immediately subject to a prohibition. What they're proposing to do here is to actually change the system such that somebody can walk in and make what's called an ex parte application. So an application where it's just them and the other side doesn't get to present their side of the story. in order to say, listen, this person should be banned from having guns. And a lot of that, I suspect that a lot of these will be approved on sort of minimal information, and a firearm prohibition will be immediately issued. So what this will affect most is police officers. This is effectively an anti-police measure because and anti-military, because the people who are most affected by this are those groups. If you are not in those groups, you're probably not going to experience a whole lot of difference. Some difference, certainly, because, you know, the police are able to at least do a little bit more checking and see, for instance, you know, does the person who's making this complaint have a history of making fake complaints? Because if they do, maybe the police are going to take a little bit longer to address this. Whereas a justice who's, you know, sitting hearing one of these ex parte applications is not going to be able to do any additional review. They're not going to be able to do anything like, you know, check the person's criminal record and go, hey, this person's got 20 convictions for perjury and 16 convictions for assault against the person they're asking to take the guns away from. Maybe we should not do this. You know, maybe we need to do some more investigation. The justice won't be able to do that. So what we're actually getting is a less informed process. But again, the people most affected are going to be police officers, because if you do this to a police officer, and again, the justice might not actually hear that they're a police officer, because that might be a detail that the person making the ex parte application leaves out, then they can say, hey, this person needs to be banned from having guns. Some bad actor could easily just kick officers off the force. So, hey, police unions, you might want to get on this one. You might want to, you know, make your views known, because this one's aimed squarely at you. This one is going to ruin the day at, you know, for some police officer out there somewhere. And yeah, it's a really bad idea in terms of how they're implementing it. But when they say that there are no red flag laws, you know, or when they imply that, that's just dishonest, because they're there. They exist. Yeah. So that's the mandate letter. It's, you know, there's more to it. You can go read the whole thing. I'll link it below. But, I mean, there are some points I agree with, or at least agree with the idea, but they're taking really baby steps. I mean, I would like to see more civilian oversight of policing. It's a great idea, but I really wish that the steps they were proposing in that regard were meaningful steps and not, well, we'll think about it. Okay, cool. But there's some really bad stuff in here, really ugly stuff, and it's not going to help stop crime at all. It just won't. Anyway, thank you for watching. Please like this video, please share it with your friends, subscribe to see more content. I also want to thank my Patreon supporters. At the $50 level, Jonathan Wheeler, Canada's National Firearms Association, Mike, Kyle Martin, Jean-Guy Toussaint, the CCFR, and the Canadian Shooting Sports Association. At the $30 level, Sights and Arms Limited and Marc-Olivier Demour. And at the $20 level, Raymond Dell McKinnon, Peter Hilger, Matt Ward, Mark Whittington, Jane Babin Luxer, Dale Nesbitt, Cameron Johnson, Bruno R., Andrew Elsich, and Aaron Del Salt. Thank you as well to the $10 supporters who will be in the crawl immediately following. My next video is going to be on discussing the latest news on my Section 74. So stay tuned. That'll be coming out fairly shortly here. Thank you once again for watching, and I hope I've armed you with knowledge.